Christopher Columbus, Part 1, written by Wilbur F. Gordy. At last all was ready, and a half hour before sunrise on Friday morning, August 3, 1492, this little fleet, with 120 men and provisions for a year, sailed out of the port of Palos. It was a sorrowful hour for the poor sailors, who felt that they had looked upon their homes and their friends for the last time. Columbus steered for the Canaries, where he delayed 3 weeks to repair the rudder of the Pinta. On September 6th, he set sail again. When once out of sight of land, the sailors, overcome with fear, cried and sobbed like children. But new trials awaited them. At the end of a week, the compass needle no longer pointed to the North Star, and this strange fact filled the superstitious sailors with alarm. Great was their consternation when a few days later the vessels entered vast stretches of seaweed. At first, the little fleet easily plowed its way through this mass of floating green, but at the end of 3 days, on account of a light wind, the vessels moved more slowly. In their dismay, the sailors feared that the vessels might never get through this immense sea of grass, but might have to lie there and rot, or perhaps, escaping this danger, run upon rocks and shoals lying just beneath the grass and be broken in pieces. Although they were in the midst of obstacles apparently insurmountable, they were also in the path of trade winds that steadily bore them onward. But in their terror, the sailors imagined they could never return because the wind would not allow them to sail in the opposite direction. When the wind began to blow from the southwest, they were once more relieved of their fears. After many days, all hearts were gladdened by the sight of birds, which indicated that land was near. It was an idle hope. Again and again, some eager-eyed sailor shouted land, but found later that he was looking at distant clouds. The crews were in despair. Now, in the belt of trade winds that were steadily blowing them farther and farther from home and friends, they cried in dismay, "We can never return to Spain. We are lost. What shall we do?" They begged Columbus to turn back. They became angry when he refused and declared he was crazy and was leading them all to destruction. They even plotted to throw him overboard some night and say that he fell into the sea while looking at the stars. Columbus felt that dangers were growing thick about him, but he never faltered in his purpose. His strong will and his abiding faith in success kept him staunch in face of difficulties that would have caused an ordinary mind to give way. On October 11th, unmistakable signs of land appeared. A thorn branch with berries on it, a reed, and a carved stick came floating by. New life stirred in every heart, and the sailors looked eagerly in every direction for land. The king and queen had promised a reward equal to nearly $600 of our present money to the sailor who should be the first to see land. Columbus had promised in addition a velvet cloak. Accordingly, all were on the alert to catch the first glimpse of land, and kept on the watch during the entire night after the appearance of the thorn branch and carved stick. About 10 o'clock, Columbus himself saw in the distance a light which looked like a torch in the hands of someone moving along the shore. About 2 o'clock next morning, Friday, October 12th or October 21st, according to our present method of reckoning time, a sailor on the Pinta saw, about 5 miles off, a low strip of land. This was an island of the Bahama group. Just 10 weeks had elapsed since the voyage began at Palos, and with intense eagerness, Columbus and his men awaited the coming of daylight. At dawn, the boats were lowered, and all went on shore. Columbus, dressed in a rich robe of scarlet, carried the royal standard. His followers also bore banners, on each of which was a brilliant green cross with the letters F and Y, the Spanish initials for Ferdinand and Isabella, on each side. Above the letters were crosses. Columbus threw himself kneeling upon the ground. He wept with joy, and kissing the earth, took possession of the land in the name of the King and Queen of Spain. The sailors now fell upon their knees at Columbus's feet. They kissed his hands and begged him to forgive them for their evil thoughts toward him. At first, the natives, who Columbus called Indians because he thought he was in the East Indies, fled to the woods in fear of the Spaniards. But later, they returned and worshiped the white men as beings from the sky. They thought the vessels were great birds and the sails wings. The Spaniards at once began to trade with the Indians, giving them such trifles as tiny bells, red caps, and glass beads, in exchange for tame parrots, cotton yarn, and a few small ornaments of gold, such as the natives wore in their nose. Christopher Columbus, Part 2, written by Wilbur F. Gordy. Columbus called the people he saw Indians. He thought he was in the East Indies. These people hid in the woods. They were afraid. Later, they came back to worship the white men. They thought the white men came from the sky. They thought the ships were birds and the sails wings. Columbus and his men traded with the Indians. They gave them tiny bells, red caps, and glass beads. They wanted the tame parrots, cotton yarn, and gold the natives wore in their noses. Columbus wrote in his journal saying they were very poor. Their skin was dark and they wore no clothes. They seemed to be young and strong. Their hair was long and black. It was cut short over in front. Colors were painted all over their bodies. The men carried sticks. The tips were made of pointed fish bones. They rowed in canoes with paddles that looked like wooden shovels. The canoes were made of tree trunks. Some were large enough to carry 40 men. Homes were put in groups of 12 to 15. They were shaped like tents and had high chimneys. Inside the tents, hanging between posts, were nets used as beds and called hammocks. Columbus called the island where he landed San Salvador, Holy Savior. He wrote, "I know not where first to go, nor are my eyes ever weary of looking." The singing of the birds was so pretty he never wanted to leave. There were so many parrots he could hardly see the sun. In fact, all the birds were very different from any he had seen. The many kinds of trees had fruits of all different tastes. Columbus sailed about, landing here and there. He sent parties to find out about the land and people. Everywhere he looked for the cities of Asia. He always believed that he was in East Indies. On Christmas morning, December 25, 1492, the Santa Maria ran up on a sandbar. It was still dark. The waves soon broke her in pieces, as the Pinta had already gone. Now the Niña was the only ship left. This little vessel was too small for all the men. 40 men wanted to stay where they were. They wanted to build a fort out of the wood from the Santa Maria. The ship's guns would keep the fort safe. These men had supplies for 1 year. They began the first Spanish settlement. On January 4th, 1493, the Niña sailed for Spain. On February 12th, a great storm began breaking up the little Niña. Poor Columbus, he was afraid. He and his men had gone through so many hard things. Were they going to die in this strange sea? Was the world never going to hear about his new world? Columbus wrote 2 pages about his discovery. He sealed them. He addressed them to Ferdinand and Isabella. He wrapped each in cloth. He put big cakes of wax around them. Columbus placed them in barrels. 1 barrel he tossed into the sea. The other barrel stayed on deck with him. The Niña passed safely through the storm. On March 15th, 7.5 months after they left, the Niña came home. The king and queen welcomed him. There was a great parade. 6 Indians whom Columbus had brought back with him walked in the parade. They were painted, wore feathers and bits of gold. Next came men carrying birds and animal skins from the new land. Columbus rode on horseback. Many of Spain's great men rode horses beside him. The parade stopped at the house where King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella waited. Columbus went into the throne room. They stood up to honor him. When he bowed to kiss their hands, they asked him to rise and sit by them. The poor sailor, once despised as an idle dreamer, had become a distinguished personage, honored alike by kings and princes and people. It was no longer necessary to force men by royal decree to sail with the great admiral. Many were now eager to go where they might reap wealth and honor. In September 1493, Columbus again sailed, this time with a fleet of 17 vessels and 1,500 men. Many of the latter were young men of noble birth and belonged to families of wide influence. All supposed they were going to the East Indies, the land of jewels and spices and precious metals, with the purpose of founding a colony. Columbus took with him not only horses, mules, and cattle, but vines, vegetables, and seeds of many kinds. When the fleet reached the island of Haiti, and the place where he had in the previous winter left the little colony of 40 men, he found that the fort and provisions had been destroyed, and that 11 corpses had been buried nearby, but not one of the 40 men was ever again seen alive. After building a little town called Isabella in honor of the Queen, Columbus began exploring by land and sea. He found much that was beautiful and interesting, but much more that was disappointing. Moreover, the Indians were sometimes unfriendly, and his own men were often unruly and treacherous. At length, after 4 years of varying fortune, he started home, and after a long, hard voyage, during which provisions gave out, he and his men, weak with hunger, finally reached Spain in June. He was kindly received and was promised more ships for another voyage. In May 1498, with 6 vessels and 200 men besides the sailors, Columbus started out on a third voyage, this time directing his course more to the south than he had done before. He landed on an island which he named Trinidad, and then sailed along the northern coast of South America. He was not well, however, and in August turned his course for Santo Domingo, where he found things were going badly. Trouble with the Indians had arisen, and, even more serious, trouble in the colony itself had broken out. For 2 years, Columbus struggled to set things right, but he was not successful as a colonizer. Besides, many people were beginning to lose faith in him because he did not get expected treasures for Spain. Many others were jealous of his fame and plotted to ruin him. At length, an official was sent from Spain to Haiti to look into the situation. When he reached the island, he confiscated Columbus's property, put him in chains, and sent him as a prisoner to the country from which he had but recently sailed with high honor. In Spain, the people were sympathy with the admiral in his disgrace. So, too, was the Queen, who sent money and summoned him to court. She received him there with tears in her eyes, and he broke down and wept at her feet. In 1502, Columbus started on a 4th voyage, sailing along the eastern coast of Central America, but he was not able to accomplish much, and finally suffered a shipwreck on the island of Jamaica, where he spent a year of misery. At last he set out for home, arriving there only a short time before Queen Isabella, his only protector, died. Poor, sick, and discouraged, Columbus dragged out a weary life for 18 months longer. He died in Spain of a broken heart, May 20th, 1506, in utter ignorance of the greatness of his discovery. So little appreciated was he that the city annals made no mention of his death. It remained for succeeding generations to lift his name from obscurity and to give faithful acknowledgment of his achievements in the advance of human progress. Hernando de Soto, written by Wilbur F. Gordy. After the discovery of the New World by Columbus, the Spaniards, who had no other thought than that he had found a new way to India, dreamed eagerly of its marvelous wealth, and were impatient to be off to the land where they believed fortunes awaited them. So zealous were they in their mad search for gold and adventure that many were willing to leave home and friends for years. The most brilliant of these explorers were Cortez, the conqueror of Mexico, and Pizarro, the conqueror of Peru, both of whom carried back to Spain many millions of dollars worth of gold and silver. With Pizarro was a young man named Hernando de Soto, whose adventurous life is full of interest and whose important discovery of the Mississippi River has given him a prominent place in the history of our country. He was born about 1500 of a poor but noble family. In his youth he excelled in athletic sports and possessed unusual skill in horsemanship and in fencing. Taking a leading part in all the dangerous exploits in the New World, he not only won fame, but went back to Spain after many years' absence a rich man. While Cortez and Pizarro had been conquering Mexico and Peru, other Spaniards had been seeking their fortune in Florida. Thus far these men had brought back no gold and silver, but their faith in the mines of the interior was so great that De Soto wished to conquer and explore the country. Having already won great influence by his achievements, he secured the favor of the king, who made him governor of the island of Cuba and appointed him leader of an expedition to conquer and occupy Florida. He was to take men enough with him to build forts and plant a colony, so as to hold the country for Spain. De Soto had no difficulty in getting followers to join him in his enterprise. Young men from noble families flocked to his standard from all parts of Spain, and as he knew that dangers and hardships awaited them, he was careful to select from the large numbers the strongest men. De Soto's company included richly dressed nobles and warriors in glittering armor. It was a gala day when they sailed out of port with banners flying and cannon booming, and not a young man of them but felt proud to sail on so grand an expedition. After arriving in Cuba, De Soto spent some time there, and then, leaving his wife to govern the island, he set out to explore Florida. His expedition was an imposing one, comprising 9 vessels, 600 men, and about 225 horses. In May 1539, the whole force landed at Tampa Bay on the western coast of Florida. In spite of hunger, disease, death, and many other misfortunes, De Soto, in his mad search for gold, threaded his way through the tangled forests until, in the spring of 1541, about 2 years after landing at Tampa Bay, he reached the bank of the Mississippi River. After spending months in making boats, he at length crossed the mighty stream, and then continued his march in a northerly and westerly direction, going, it would seem, as far as the site of what is now Little Rock, the capital of Arkansas. Marching southeast, probably to the banks of the Washita, he spent a winter so severe that many of the party, including Ortiz, died. About the middle of April 1542, the Spaniards, travel spent and sick at heart, reached the mouth of the Red River, where De Soto, discouraged and broken in spirit, was taken ill with fever and soon died. At first his followers buried his body near the town where they were staying, but when the Indians began, with some suspicion, to examine the ground under which he lay, the Spaniards, in the darkness of the night, took up the body, wrapped it in blankets made heavy with sand, and sadly lowered it into the waters of the mighty river which it was De Soto's chief honor to have discovered. After many more hardships, the wretched survivors of this unhappy company, numbering not many more than half of those who landed at Tampa Bay, found their way to a Spanish colony in Mexico. Thus ended in disaster the expedition which sailed with such hope and wealth and renown. Sir Walter Raleigh, written by Wilbur F. Gordy. Although England had not a fighting navy, English seamen were alert to capture Spanish vessels and rob them of their gold and silver. To seize these prizes, such bold sea captains as Drake and Hawkins roamed the sea, burning and plundering Spanish fleets and Spanish settlements along the coast of Mexico and South America. Conspicuous among these daring sea rovers and explorers was Sir Walter Raleigh, one of the most distinguished Englishmen of his time. He was born in a town near the seacoast in Devonshire, England, in 1552. His father and mother both of high social rank. In this town lived many old sailors who could tell the wide-awake boy stirring tales of seafaring life and of bloody fights with Spaniards. Walter was a patriotic boy, and therefore soon learned to hate Spain because of her insolence toward the English people. As he became older and learned more of the power of Spain, especially that which came through possessions in the New World, he was envious for his country's sake and wished her to become Spain's rival in wealth. When Walter was old enough, he was sent to Oxford University, where he became an earnest student. But at 17 he put aside his studies and went to France to join the Huguenot army. After remaining there for about 6 years, he returned to England and served for a short time in the English army, fighting against Spain and Austria in the Netherlands. Later, he went as captain of 100 men to Ireland, and there proved himself a brave soldier. Returning again to England, by a simple act of courtesy, he won the admiration of the powerful Queen Elizabeth. It happened in this way. On one occasion, she was about to cross a muddy road with her attendants as Raleigh stood looking on. Noticing that the Queen hesitated for an instant, he took from his shoulder his beautiful velvet cloak and gallantly spread it in her pathway. The Queen, greatly pleased with this delicate attention, took Raleigh into her court and in time bestowed upon him much honor. She not only made him a knight, but also presented him with costly gifts and estates, and showered upon him offices of rank and dignity. The brave knight, Sir Walter Raleigh, became a man of great wealth and influence. As a courtier, his dress was rich and dazzling. He wore a hat with a pearl band and a black jeweled feather. His shoes, which were tied with white ribbons, were studded with gems worth 6,600 gold pieces. He had also a suit of silver armor that glittered with diamonds and other precious stones. This splendor did not seem so much out of place in those days as it would now, for much display and ceremony were customary in court life. Queen Elizabeth, with her 1,075 dresses and mantles, ornamented with lace, embroidery, and jewels, and with her 80 wigs of various colors, set a gorgeous example which her courtiers were delighted to follow. But Raleigh was not satisfied with the glamour of court life. He was eager to achieve glory for England, and if possible, to elevate her upon the ruins of her enemy, Spain. It was his desire to build up a new England for the glory of the old, and to that end he secured from Queen Elizabeth a charter for planting a colony in America. He therefore fitted out 2 vessels, which were to sail to the land north of Florida, then occupied by Spain, and bring back reports of the country. The captains of these vessels arrived in Pamlico Sound and landed on an island which they found rich in grapes and woods and abounding in deer and other game. The explorers received kind treatment from the Indians, 2 of which accompanied the voyagers to England on their return. Queen Elizabeth was so pleased with the good reports from the new country that she called it Virginia in honor of herself, the Virgin Queen. The next year, 1585, Raleigh sent out to Virginia 7 vessels and 100 colonists under his cousin Sir Richard Grenville and Ralph Lane. They landed on Roanoke Island and made a settlement there, but the colony was not prosperous. At the outset, by unwise and cruel treatment, they made enemies of the natives. It is related that after an Indian stole a silver cup from one of the colonists, the Englishmen burned an entire village and ruined the corn belonging to its people. Such punishment was out of all proportion to the petty offense. It is not surprising, therefore, that from time to time the settlers found the Indians unfriendly. Very soon, Grenville sailed back to England, leaving the colony in charge of Ralph Lane. The colonists, instead of building houses and tilling the soil to supply food, were bent upon finding gold. Hence, they listened with eager interest to a story that the Indians told of the Roanoke River. According to this story, the river flowed out of a fountain in a rock so near the ocean that in time of storm the waves dashed over into the fountain. The river, the Indians said, flowed near rich mines of gold and silver in a country where there was a town with walls made of pearls. Lane and his followers foolishly started up the river in a vain search for this wonderful land. They encountered many difficulties, including hostile attacks by Indians, and suffered so much from lack of food that they had to eat the flesh of their own dogs. The discovery of the tobacco plant introduced into England the custom of smoking, and a curious story is told of it in connection with Sir Walter Raleigh, who soon learned to smoke. One day, his servant, who knew nothing of the new custom, came into his master's room and found him smoking from a silver pipe. Believing Raleigh was on fire, the faithful servant hastily dashed a mug of ale at him to quench the flames and rescue him from death. The wealth that lay hidden in the soil was yet unknown, and no one felt any enthusiasm over the new colony of Virginia. Most men would by this time have lost hope, but Raleigh was not daunted. 2 years later, he made a second attempt to plant a colony in the New World, this time sending over 3 ships with 150 settlers, including 17 women. John White was appointed governor of the colony. These settlers had the forethought to carry with them farming implements to use in tilling the soil. When they landed on Roanoke Island, they found no trace of the 15 men left there 2 years before by Sir Richard Grenville. The new settlers had not been on the island long before they were in need of help from England, and begged Governor White to return home for provisions and more settlers. White at first refused to leave them, but finally consented. A warm interest in the feeble settlement and love for his little granddaughter, born soon after the settlers arrived, persuaded him to yield. This little girl, the first white girl born in America, was named after the new country, Virginia, her full name being Virginia Dare. When Governor White left the settlement, he expected to return immediately, but upon reaching England, he found his countrymen greatly excited over the coming invasion of the much-dreaded Spanish Armada. Everybody was astir, and Raleigh was aroused to his fullest energy in preparation to meet the hated foe. But notwithstanding this, he found time to fit out 2 small vessels for Governor White. Although they sailed, trouble with the Spaniards compelled their return to England, and not until 2 years later, when the Spanish Armada had been defeated, did Governor White sail again for Virginia, this time as a passenger in a West Indian. He landed on Roanoke Island as before, but there remained of the settlement only some chests of books, some maps, and some firearms, all of which had been ruined by the Indians. Upon bidding Governor White farewell, the colonists had agreed to carve on a tree the name of the place to which they would go if they should decide to leave Roanoke Island. They were also to carve above the name a cross if they were in serious trouble. Governor White found the word Croatian cut in capital letters on a large tree, but he found no cross. Before White could sail to Croatian, which was an island not far away, he had to return to England because the captain of the vessel, having encountered stormy weather, refused to sail further. What became of the lost colonists is still a mystery. It is possible that the Indians either killed them or captured and enslaved them. Raleigh sent out other expeditions in search of the lost colony, but without success. He had already spent a sum equal to more than $1 million in trying to plant this colony, and now he felt that he must give up all hope of accomplishing this purpose.